Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back again to another Q&A session. My name is Chris Justice. I am an employment lawyer. I work out of Samfiru, Tumarkin's Toronto office. And I'm back here today to join all of you in hopes of answering as many of your questions as I can. So anything employment law related, please do send your questions in and I will do my best to answer as many as I can today. And as always, I'll be back for those that I don't answer later on. So get your questions in. I would like to start, however, as I always do, with just a bit of information, some topics that I think are important for people to be aware of, and hopefully that will help people into the future. Today, what I was going to talk about was going to be some situations where an individual is told by their employer that they're actually not entitled to any severance for a number of different reasons. So I'm going to touch on some of the most common situations I find where people come to me and they are essentially telling me that they've lost their job. The employer, for some reason or another, is saying they're actually not entitled to any severance whatsoever. So the first situation this arises in that I'll talk about has to do with an employer who believes that there is just cause to terminate someone's employment. And even if there is just cause, there are still situations where that individual is owed severance. But in situations where no severance is owed and there's just cause, the employer needs to meet a very high threshold in terms of what constitutes just cause. Because to deny somebody severance, they're going to need to show that there was some serious issue, perhaps a serious form of misconduct or a serious breach of trust. But very rarely do companies actually have the argument or an argument good enough to establish just cause. So if you're being told that your employment is being terminated for just cause, and as a result, you're being denied severance or you're being offered a very minor amount of severance, definitely don't sign anything. Definitely get in touch with us because there's a good chance that the employer does not have just cause and that therefore the employer owes you potentially a significant amount of severance as a result. So that's scenario number one, people that are told there's just cause to terminate their employment. Scenario number two has to do with people who are seen as being an independent contractor versus an employee. And so another common situation that I've dealt with a lot, somebody comes to me, whether they're a truck driver, whether they are a business owner, whether, whatever the situation is, but they come to me and they say, hey, Chris, I'm an independent contractor and my employer has ended my employment, has terminated my employment. But because I'm being told I'm an independent contractor, my employer is saying I'm actually not entitled to severance like an employee would be. And first of all, much like the just cause example that I just gave, if you're being told by your employer that you're an independent contractor and that's the reason why you're not getting any severance, there's a very good chance that you are actually not an independent contractor and that the law would treat you almost like an employee. And this is the case even if you have a contract that says you're an independent contractor. Even people who have their own employees or people who invoice the company or people who have their own corporations that they invoice through, people who pay taxes themselves rather than the company paying the taxes. These are all things that can be factually correct and still there be a finding that that person's an employee. So don't think that just because there's something in writing saying you're an independent contractor or because you've got your own corporation that you invoice through or you handle the HST yourself, don't think that that's going to mean you're an independent contractor and that you're not entitled to severance. So again, this is another situation that you'll want to get in touch with us because what you need to do is actually look behind the phrase independent contractor and actually examine the relationship that you have with that employer. So any situation where you're very reliant on the income that you earn through that employer and that employer has control over you in terms of what you do for work and how you do it, those are often going to be situations where an independent contractor is actually seen as an employee that would be entitled to severance. So again, if you're an independent contractor or think you're an independent contractor and you're being told that you're not owed severance, that's not the case for the most part, and you'll want to get in touch with us. A third scenario, and this is a more topical scenario that I've brought up many times in the recent past, has to do with a situation where your employment is suspended or you're placed on some form of an unpaid leave of absence without your consent because you violated a company policy. And I say this is topical, and I've been talking about this because one example, it has to do with COVID policies. And I know there's already questions in here about people being placed on an unpaid leave of absence, which I assume has to do somewhat has to do with the pandemic, with a company's COVID-19 policy and you not complying with that policy. So if you have been suspended or placed on an unpaid leave of absence due to not getting vaccinated, give us a call because being placed on an unpaid leave of absence without your consent is almost always very similar to a termination. And your severance entitlements could be triggered as a result of being placed on an unpaid leave of absence without your consent. So if you've lost your job in any way due to COVID, and I guess in this case, specifically relating to policies or breaches of COVID policies, don't think that you're without rights. Don't think that you're not entitled to severance, and definitely give us a shout because that's, again, another situation where your employer is essentially terminating your employment, but not giving you any severance on the way out. And generally speaking, that's not acceptable. And so you'll need to fight that. But if you're in that situation, which I'm sure a lot of people are, again, give us a shout. So those are three main or primary situations that I come across where employees are being told that they're not going to get any severance. So just to recap, it would be breaching, for example, a COVID policy. It would be being told that they're being terminated for just cause, which is very hard to prove. And the third one being that they're told that they're an independent contractor and that for that reason, they're not entitled to severance. So if you're in any one of those situations, definitely give us a shout. We've also got a calculator that we use on our website, an employment law calculator, a pocket employment law calculator. The link is down below there. And that will also give you an idea of what kind of severance that you could be looking at potentially if, in fact, your employment was terminated. And so that calculator will talk about sort of the factors that are considered, things like your age, how long you've been there, the position that you held, the compensation that you made, and just the availability of employment similar to that that's out there right now. So check that out for sure, and that'll give you a kind of a rough starting point on what you could get, and we can definitely talk about it further and flesh any further details out that need be. But having said that, I'm going to get into some questions. So thanks, as always, to all of you. For those of you actually that are watching us on YouTube, definitely want to subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, because that way, with the algorithm that YouTube has, we'll be able to reach a broader audience and hopefully kind of shed some more light on a lot of these issues that a lot of people are not aware of, and get people ultimately what they fairly and rightly deserve. So if you haven't already, definitely subscribe, hit like, all that kind of stuff. And but having said that, I'll get into some questions. So thanks everyone as always for the questions. I've got a question from Robin on Facebook. And Robin is saying or asking, last week I was put on an unpaid leave due to a policy change of the vaccination. Robin's a non-unionized healthcare worker, and his employer's telling them that there's no severance. They've been put on a leave of absence, it seems like, or they're being asked to sign a leave of absence. So I would say don't sign anything before talking to a lawyer, number one, because that could end up hurting you later on down the road. And number two, as I mentioned a moment ago, if you're someone who's been put on an unpaid leave for breaching a vaccine policy, For the most part, and with very few exceptions, you're going to be entitled to some severance. So definitely get in touch with us, Robin. It'll come down as well to how long you've been there and your age and how much you've earned and all that kind of stuff that I mentioned a second ago as well. But it does look like you could very well be entitled to some severance here. So give us a shout. But thank you for your question. I've got another one in from Guy or G on Facebook, and they're asking, how can our firm, Samfiru Tumarkin, help with EI status relating to being let go for not being vaccinated? So that's another good question, very common question. A lot of people right now are applying for EI, for example, because they've lost their job for not getting vaccinated and for apparently breaching company policy. And so they've applied for EI. And the response that I'm hearing a lot from EI is that they're not giving people benefits. And so that's something that we can definitely help out with. I think at the moment, what's going to be required is that you will have to apply for EI for sure. You'll have to explain the circumstances as to why you lost your job. And then at that point, it's going to be up to EI to decide whether and to what extent you should get benefits. If you're denied those benefits, there's an appeal process that you can use where you kind of fight it at the second level. And then if you get denied at that level, I understand there might be at least one more appeal process there. So that's what I've been generally telling people, or that's how I've been trying to help people out, is by appealing these denials, if there are denials, until you can't essentially appeal anymore. But that's something that we can help people out with at the firm, in addition to getting them severance or dealing with any other issues that might be present. So Guy or G, definitely give us a shout if you're in that situation. I'm sure we can do as best we can to help you out in that respect. Going through some questions. Thanks again, everybody. I've got a question in from Rodica on Facebook. They're saying, what can I do? I was let go from the University of Waterloo after 30 years. And I think she's saying her husband also was let go after 31 years. And there was a request for an accommodation based on religion. So I assume this is another vaccine case, in the sense that you were told to get vaccinated. You objected to being vaccinated on religious grounds. They refused those grounds, and they went forward with terminating your employment and that of your husband's. So unfortunately, that is a situation that is very common these days, where people are asking for exemptions, whether it's medical, religious, disability related. I guess that's tied to medical, but for a number of different reasons. And for the most part, they're getting denied. And it seems like unless you're someone who has already taken the first vaccine and you had an adverse or a negative reaction to that vaccine, that seems to be one of the very few exceptions that employers are sort of accepting. But I will say, Rodica, that there's a very good chance you could be looking at some compensation. It will depend on sort of what the school's policy was. And also it could depend on whether you can do your job from home. So I think that's another important aspect that I want to touch on very briefly. And that has to do with people who are being told they need to be vaccinated, but who are actually working at home, and therefore who don't necessarily need to be in proximity or in closeness to others, versus somebody who actually needs to be on site in the workspace. And so if you're somebody who's working from home, or you've been working from home since March of 2020, and you can essentially do your job in that respect, then for your employer to insist that you get vaccinated, and if you don't by a certain day, lose your job, of course, is going to make less sense from a practical standpoint. So that's another factor that myself and my colleagues, and I know other lawyers, are sort of using, if it applies, to show perhaps, maybe the more of the unreasonableness of the policy. But Rodica, it would just come back to exactly why you were let go, if there was testing made available or vaccines, what the mandate was specifically in regards to the University of Waterloo, because sometimes different areas can differ. and also, other facts that come into play. But I would say give us a call, because if you put in 30 plus years and you've lost your job, of course, it would be a shame to simply have to walk away from that scenario and get nothing on your way out, especially in the context of, not getting vaccinated. So give us a shout. I'm sure there's something that we can do, and that there are options for you. So definitely get in touch with us. So thank you, though, for bringing up your question. I've got some other questions in here. So question from JBK on YouTube asking, how long can you be placed on an unpaid leave? And that's a good question, because if you leave it up to the employer, what the employer is going to say is they will place you on an unpaid leave until you get vaccinated. And I'm sorry, I'm talking about an unpaid leave in the context of vaccines. So people have asked me before, how long can companies do this for? And there's no real clear, concise answer that I can give, other than, for the most part, companies cannot do this at all. And that would trigger your termination. So the company, of course, if it was up to them, would have you on that leave for as long as possible. They're not going to want to make it seem like you've been actually terminated. They're going to want to continue to say that you're still an employee of theirs. And they say that because it'll benefit them as far as their argument that you shouldn't be given severance. So don't wait around forever because you're on an unpaid leave and you haven't been told when you might be called back. Get in touch with us right away, because there's a good chance you'll just be kept on leave indefinitely, until you either find your next job or get vaccinated and return. So definitely something you want to act on sooner rather than later. But thanks, JBK, for your question. Giselle on YouTube is asking, have you been successful representing someone being terminated due to vaccination issues? Were you able to get them severance? And Giselle, myself, actually, I've got a number of matters on the go in situations involving these terminations. And I've actually had some of those cases settle where my client has been given severance. A lot of my cases are sort of still in the midst of settling or going through the litigation process. So I do imagine actually that a lot of them will settle in the near future. But I have been able to get some people severance. So it'll come down, I think, to how much severance you're asking for, what the company is that you work for, and who their lawyers are. But I think for the most part, it'll require some time. But the vast majority of these cases, I can see settling before any trial and severance being paid out. But it's just a question more of, in my view, when, not so much if, and what that looks like. But there has been success already. So take that for what it's worth. And Giselle, if you are someone in that situation, get in touch with us, because, what I tell people is, you can either pursue these rights and entitlements that you have and sort of put the employer to the test in that respect, not necessarily knowing when you'll settle, or you can just simply walk away and go your separate way, which, especially for long-term service employees, again, I think would just be a huge shame. So again, you want to take action sooner rather than later, because if anyone's going to delay things, for the most part, it's going to be your employer. And so, yeah, definitely get in touch with us if you need any help in that respect, Giselle. But thank you for your question. Sorry, just going through some more questions. JBK is asking how long you can be placed on unpaid leave. So I believe I answered that. I've got some other questions. Question from Mark on YouTube. Mark is asking, what about if you're on a fixed term contract and you let go before your contract ends? So that's a good question, Mark. Fixed term contracts, that is a scenario that I see often in my practice. And what I will say in short is that it depends. However, say, for example, you have a fixed term contract that's 2 years long, and your employer decides to terminate that contract after just 1 year. There's a chance that because there was a year left of that contract, that your employer would have to pay the full year, regardless of what happens in the future, regardless of whether you find another job, and also regardless of how long you've been there in total. So it could actually be the case that you've only been there for a year, but you had a year left of your contract, and they actually have to pay out the entirety of that extra year. So that's a possibility, Mark. Another possibility is that if you're on a fixed term contract and it's in writing, there could be a section in the contract that talks about what happens if they terminate your contract early. So maybe the initial intention might have been that this guy worked here for 2 years, and then they let you go midway through. There could be something in that contract that says, if we let you go at a time before your 2 years are up, before the fixed term is up, this is how much we have to pay. That could potentially affect how much you get. But it'll really come down in that case to the actual language that's in the contract. So anytime anyone has an issue with a contract, and you'll see below, if you need a contract review, definitely get in touch with us. But anytime there's an issue that involves a contract, oftentimes it's very important what the contract says word for word. And there could be a minor grammar issue or spelling mistake or misplaced comma that results in a different interpretation of that contract. And that may be enough as the employee to sort of use to your advantage. So don't think, again, that just because a contract says something in particular that you're going to be stuck or held to that. So Mark, it kind of depends. Again, in answering your question, you might get less. You could get the balance of that contract. You could get something else. But there are a lot of situations where you're owed something, even if you're on a fixed term contract. So again, that might be another scenario that you want to get in touch with us about, so we can sort of flesh it out a bit more. But hopefully that answers your question. Thanks again, Mark. Rodika, the individual I was talking about earlier, said yes, both her and her husband have been let go. So again, Rodika, get in touch with us. I'm sure we can help out. I've got another question in here from through YouTube by JC 2004. JC's asking, when a company hires an employee and offers a bonus after 90 days or 1 year, etc., and then decides to terminate just before that time arrives, what will be done, if anything? So JC, again, short answer is it will depend on a bit more information, but I have seen a situation occur a lot where somebody signs a contract. The contract says you'll get a base salary. It also says you'll get a bonus. And it says that your bonus is based on performance. So it could be the company's performance, it could be your performance, it could be both. The bonuses, let's say, are calculated over the calendar year or a certain period of time. If you perform to a certain standard, over a certain period of time, you may get a bonus of XYZ. And usually a bonus then gets paid out if you qualify, maybe a couple months after that, maybe in the first quarter of the following year. And a lot of people get let go before that bonus gets paid out, even though they worked that whole year. And let's say the bonus gets paid out in March. These people get let go in, say, January or February. And the employer says, well, we let you go before the bonus was paid out, so we don't have to pay you the bonus. Well, no, in a lot of cases, actually, you do have to pay the bonus, especially if that bonus was earned, and especially if that was an expectation that the employee had. You know, they put in the work, they get the bonus, maybe just like many other years before that, they got the bonus. So sometimes definitely employers try to prevent you from getting that bonus because you weren't around when it got paid out. And so don't think that you're dead to rights there, that you have no options, JC. So it kind of depends, again, on the circumstances, but especially if you get terminated, you know, a few days before the bonus gets paid out, of course, that's going to look bad from an optics perspective for the company because they may be seen as obviously trying to avoid paying you that on some, you know, weak technicality, perhaps. So if especially if the bonus is a large bonus. I mean, if you're making $100,000 or $50,000 and the bonus is 10, 20, 30 grand, that's not insignificant. And again, that'll sort of factor into the equation in terms of whether a court would say it should be paid out. So yeah, something can typically be done, JC. It'll depend on, again, the language of the contract, if there is one, and some other factors. But if you're being unfairly denied a bonus and it's potentially a significant amount, that'll be something you want to talk with us about, and I think we could be of help. So thank you though for your question. I've got some other questions coming in. Thanks for everyone. Again, I won't be able to get to everyone's questions, so bear with me. I've got a question or a comment in from Ruth on Facebook. They're saying that they were laid off due to COVID in March of 2020. They're aware of the infectious disease emergency leave that the government enacted following COVID, but is wondering if there's anything that can be done. She's been there for 20 years, or she's been there for 20 years. So Ruth, if you've been, and this goes for anyone who's been laid off, by the way, if you've been laid off due to COVID, and you, especially if you've been laid off since March of 2020, get in touch with us ASAP, because you need to act as soon as possible. You can't afford to wait around any longer, and it may actually do more harm to your case if you wait more than 2 years, because that's typically the time that you have to sue a company. 2 years from the day that you were, I guess, terminated or laid off. And given that it was March in 2020, even if there are some exceptions for you to get around that, I wouldn't risk it necessarily. So get in touch with us, because March of this year could be the deadline. And if you're a 20-year employee and you've been laid off and you've been without pay for that long, then there's a good chance you're going to be entitled to some severance. But again, you don't want to wait around. You want to act as soon as possible. So get in touch with us, and I'm sure we can help you out as well. Going through some more questions. Sorry, everyone. Just question from John on YouTube. Can I get EI when on unpaid leave with no paperwork? I mentioned this before. We definitely try to do as much as we can to get people EI. But if you've been placed on an unpaid leave due to the vaccine, it may be difficult initially for you to get EI. I would still try to apply. If you don't have paperwork, John, like for example, if you need your record of employment and your employer hasn't released one or provided one, and they have stopped paying you, I would say get in touch with Service Canada or the Ministry of Labor and get them to essentially get your employer to file that record of employment, because that'll help in applying for EI benefits. It may not help getting them initially, but usually that's the first document you're going to need. So that'll give you some paperwork there. And then if you have issues getting EI from that point onwards, that may be something that we can help out with as well. But thanks, John, for your question. So I've got some other questions. Sorry, everyone. Oh, JC's just got a follow question. And again, just for everyone's reminder, JC was asking about bonuses being offered and being terminated just before the bonus is paid out. So JC's saying, I meant more along the lines of being terminated after 70 days when a bonus might be owed after 90 days working. Due to shortages, some places might be offering bonuses to new hires. JC, it would come down to whether there's a reasonable expectation to get that bonus. So if the contract, say, for example, is very well worded in that in order to qualify for the bonus or any part of the bonus, you have to work the entirety of the 90-day period, that could alter things. But I would still say, give us a shout. If there is a contract or some sort of a bonus plan, it would be helpful to also look at that. And again, it also depends on what kind of bonus we're talking about, because that may or may not make it worth your while to potentially sue the company if you have to. But give us a shout in any event, and I'm sure we can do everything possible for you there. But thanks for the follow-up. I got another question, and this will actually be my question. Bear with me, but Flesh Wound on YouTube is asking, has there been any federal mandates in regards to disclosure of vaccination status? So there are industries within the federal jurisdiction, say federally regulated employers, people like Air Canada, for example, that do have vaccine mandates. There's cruise ships, there's certain transportation sectors within the federally regulated area that have vaccine mandates. But besides that, there isn't a whole lot. Now, last October, the federal government said that it would be implementing mandatory vaccine policies for pretty much all federally regulated businesses. So this could include banks, it could include a whole host of things. But even though they announced that in October, I believe it was, of last year, To my knowledge, there's no actual vaccine mandate that's been handed down from the federal government that applies to federally regulated businesses. Now, if we switch to provincially regulated businesses, for those of you who work in Ontario that don't work for a federally regulated company, there also are not a lot of vaccine mandates going on. So there are some exceptions or some differences, for example, when it comes to long-term care homes, when it comes to hospitals to some degree, education sector to some degree, retirement homes to some degree. But the vast majority of employers that work in this province and are provincially regulated in Ontario, there is no federal mandate to get vaccinated, and there's not even a federal mandate to get tested. So for your employer, therefore, to require those things is one thing, but to terminate you without any pay or suspend you without any pay for not complying with something that's not mandated by the government, that is where they get into a bit of an issue. And that is why myself and my colleagues believe that those individuals are entitled to severance. Until there's that mandate in place, there's going to be a very good chance that, in my view, individuals will be entitled to severance and will receive severance if they have to take it far enough. So whether you're in a federally regulated business, a provincially regulated business, whether you think there's a mandate or not, get in touch with us, because there's a high probability there's nothing in place that mandates that, and that you have rights and that you're owed something. So definitely give us a call, contact us online. And otherwise, again, I thank you very much all for your time, and I will definitely be back again. You see down below there that Lior Samfiru will be joining you on Wednesday at 1 p.m. So if you have any further questions, definitely tune in to that show, and I'll be back at some point as well. So I look forward to answering more questions that everyone has. But otherwise, have a great day and enjoy the rest of your week. Do take care. Bye.